Okay, in this movie we're going to go over our 13th question type in the argument section, the methods of reasoning questions. Okay, so our basic info for the method of reasoning questions is that the content is always an argument, because in order to determine what kind of reasoning the argument employs, there needs to be an argument present. And it's really important to pay attention to the overall structure. The main conclusion and the sub-conclusions are all important. Now this question has several different wording variations. Which one of the following most accurately describes the role played in the argument by the claim that, and then it'll present a claim, or the claim that plays which one of the following roles in the argument does which of the following, which one of the following most accurately describes the argument. So you'll see the question will ask about a particular claim in the argument, or it'll ask about the argument overall, about what the argument does, or how it's best accurately described. The correct choice in these questions states information that best describes the function of the statement that the question brings up, or the overall structure of the argument. And these questions appear regularly in every test, and they often appear several times per section. Now, this question type is different from the other question types that we went over, in that here the question is about the logical structure of the argument. In the previous questions, having an idea of the logical structure was more or less important depending on the question, but only so far as it helped you answer what the question was asking, and only insofar as it helped you understand the argument better. Here, the question itself is about the logical structure of the argument. The answers will deal directly with the nature of that logical structure. And this is another difference from the previous question types. Here you'll find two basic question types. One question type will isolate a statement from the argument and ask you to identify the role of that statement. The other question type will ask you to characterize the nature of the argument as a whole. Okay, so what's our basic approach? The most important thing is to have a good idea of the relationships between the different statements in the argument. Since an argument can have a wide variety of structures, it's not actually very useful to catalog all of them. But it is relevant to keep an eye out for the different kinds of relationships in the argument. Okay, so first, establish a clear picture of the argument, the sub-conclusions, and how many different arguments or points of view there are. Next, evaluate the relationships between the statements in the argument to see how they support the conclusion. Unlike the other question types, you're not as worried about bias or probability or shifts in terms, those kinds of things. You're not evaluating the strength of the argument, but its structure. So look to see if the statements reference one another in any ways. Are they abstractions? Are they examples? Are they consequences? Are they negations of one another? And also look to see if they perhaps form some sort of group. Are they alternatives or conditions for something? Things of that nature. Then, go through the answer choices looking for the answer that best matches what you've come up with. Okay, in terms of right answers, wrong answers, for the question type that isolates a statement and asks for its function, the correct answer is going to most accurately describe the role by correctly identifying it as a premise, a claim, a conclusion, a subconclusion, a principle, an example, a description, etc., and by correctly identifying its relationship to other statements in the argument. The correct answer choice might not necessarily label the statement as a sub-conclusion, but it could say that the statement is a conclusion which is used to support the main conclusion. So it'll give you a definition of a sub-conclusion. And the incorrect answers will misidentify the statement or its relationship to the rest of the statements. An incorrect choice might say that the statement is an example of a situation when it is in fact a conclusion. Or I might say that it's a conclusion when in fact it's a sub-conclusion. The answer choices can be presented in abstract language, or they can use the information from the argument, or it can be some combination of both. In terms of the right answers, wrong answers, for the question type that asks you to characterize the structure of the argument, the correct answer is going to most accurately characterize the overall structure by correctly identifying the basic components and fundamental relationships in the argument. The incorrect answers will use characterizations that aren't found in the argument. And the answer choices can be presented in abstract language, once again, or they can use the information from the argument, or they can be a combination of the two. Okay, so the basic approach to doing these questions is to have a good grasp of the argument and to pay attention to the relationships between the statements. And as mentioned before, don't use the step-by-step process as a rigid checklist when you're doing the questions. The key is basically to practice enough so that you've internalized what you're looking for.